Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 9:12 on a Thursday morning. So yeah, hope everyone's doing good. We got a pretty big quantum show coming up on Friday. Or sorry, not Friday, Saturday. We're gonna start at 1:30, and it's gonna be at Opera House Video at 1:30 p.m. It's gonna be me and my friend Ronnie, who plays also. He also has a electronic group. It's kind of ambient inspired stuff. It's all improvised for the most part. We've played quite a few shows together, so that's gonna be fun, and we're gonna like do these like a do something a little bit different with like a robin kind of a set. So it should be interesting and fun. So stay tuned for that. If you're around, it's going to be a free show at Opera House Video right in Belfast. So I've been doing promotion for it, and yeah. So with this channel, I've been doing, I've been trying to do, bring a variety of different kinds of things to the channel. I've been doing, of course, a ton of movie reviews like I usually do, but I always been bouncing back and forth between doing. I went down about a month and a half ago. I went down to this really awesome record shop down in Biddeford, Maine, and I bought a bunch of records or CDs in my case, and I did a bunch of reviews on some of those purchases because those albums are really great. So and that's not a new thing really for this channel. I've done lots of music shows as well as movies, obviously, which is the focus, and I like to bounce back and forth. To me, it's all of these things are a deep, source of inspiration for me. So I think the more open-minded a person is, and the more they're willing to kind of check out, is it's just an enriching experience. So today is going to be another music show. It's going to be on an album that I was super late to the game and actually listening to, and actually getting it, at times where I sat down and listened to it. I had never owned this album until about probably about 2 years ago. Really weird, and that is Miles Davis's Sketches of Spain. I picked this copy up. This is a really beautiful edition. I haven't. It's been a while since I've bought any music there, but I have gotten a ton of CDs at the Goodwill in Rockland. Goodwill in Rockland, as far as media stuff, movies and DVDs and especially Blu-rays. I've gotten so many great things from there. Locally, that's my favorite place to go to buy movies and to also buy CDs. And of course, the number one place being Bull Moose, which I have not. I've been really chomping at the bit. I have not made it out to Bull Moose in quite a while, and I am gonna definitely go. I'm gonna plan a big trip after this coming weekend to go up there because I'm chomping at the bit. I haven't bought any new Blu-rays in quite a while, and especially the movies that I love to buy, all the exploitation movies that I love. So I'm really chomping at the bit to do that. I've been trying to save a little bit of money. Prices are crazy right now, so that's been a factor. So I've been trying to save a little bit of money, but very much looking forward to that. It's probably been about 2 months since I've gone up there and bought any movies, which is insane. I was for a while going up there fairly often, like a couple times a month, sometimes even more. Probably a little too much, but it's a habit I love. It's a habit I will always continue, but it can be an expensive habit. Although I find stuff really cheap. And when it comes to like this amazing album right here, Sketches of Spain by Miles Davis, it's I got this at Goodwill, and the movies there are especially cheap, and especially their CDs. They have a really good CD selection. I've gotten a ton of great jazz, a lot of great jazz reissues, over the past couple of years. Really, really awesome. I've gotten some some my favorite. I've done shows on Miles Davis before. Miles Davis is a well, not only pretty much my favorite figure in jazz in the jazz world, but for me, he's also just an incredible source of inspiration. I just I can't get enough of Miles Davis, and I I pretty much love all of his kind of incarnations with with the various bands that he had and the various projects that he did throughout his legendary career. My favorite band that he ever had is the Miles Davis Quintet, and that, of course, is with Miles on trumpet, Ron Carter on bass, my favorite drummer of all time, hands down, Tony Williams on drums, and Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock. That band, I feel, that's a band I can listen to any day, anytime. It doesn't matter what mood I'm in. That music that those guys created with that quintet was, to me, when it comes to jazz music and even music that's based around improv and just sheer sheer creativity. It's that's my favorite jazz group of all time. And they put out so many legendary albums. Probably my favorite Miles Davis album, and also I think is the best thing they ever did as far as a quintet in the studio is Nefertiti. I know I did a show on Nefertiti a while ago. That's my favorite. That's probably my favorite jazz album of all time. I can't get enough of that album. It's such a powerful album, and it always transports me to a different place every time I listen to that record. And I think for me, as far as recorded performances of my favorite drummer of all time, Tony Williams, it's it's um it's the best he's ever sounded. But again, all of the quintet albums that they did, ESP, I mean, the list is endless. Sorcerer, all the studio albums are just masterpieces. I mean, those guys never did anything wrong. And then also over the years, there's been lots of reissues of a lot of those albums. This is a reissue of Sketches of Spain, where a lot of these recordings that were made. This album came out in 1960, so a lot of the albums that came out, many, many, many years ago, decades ago at this point, have gotten all these amazing reissues, and a lot of them come with bonus tracks, outtakes. So, but there's also been a ton of releases as far as live performances and live concerts that the quintet did. And my favorite live jazz album is Live at the Plug Nickel. It's the most amazing performance. It's my favorite live jazz album. But when it comes to Miles, the Miles Davis Quintet is my that's my go-to. I can listen to that stuff, anything that they've done, any studio album that they've done, any live stuff, any live record. You know, it doesn't matter. Uh, yeah, that's my favorite group. And it's funny, I do love all of the periods of Miles. I love when he went into the electric, period right after the quintet disbanded, and he went more into, well, like the Bitches Brew era, the Live Evil period. I love that period. I also love Kind of Blue, and then his first the quartet, and I mean, just amazing stuff. But for some reason, uh, Sketches of Spain was an album I never really checked out. I don't know why. I I was always hearing about this album, and I don't know. I kind of felt like this album was going to be, I don't know. To be honest, even though it's Miles, and it's a really big collaboration. Gil Evans, the great composer, and also you know had a background in jazz and classical music. Another musical genius. This was, of course, an album put out by both of them. I don't know. I just had these reservations about this album that maybe it would be, I don't know, just not my jam. I mean, maybe too classically based or what have you, because I'm so enamored with the the quintet stuff, and so I don't know, and but it was kind of a I put up this like wall or this barrier around the album, which was now I think it was just well stupid and ridiculous. So about 2 or 3 years ago, I was at Goodwill. I've gotten a lot of great Miles Davis reissues there too. I recently got Kind of Blue, another reissue of that. Every time I'm in there and I find any classic jazz albums, I always buy them because I always I listen to a lot of jazz, and a lot of the albums that they sell there that are of course used, they always have these they always have the reissues available, and they're usually really cheap, like $2 or $3. So I always buy them whenever I see them, and so I have like numerous versions of a lot of Miles CDs. But anyway, I bought this album about 2 or 3 years ago, and when I first heard this album, it blew me away. I This is actually one of my favorite Miles Davis albums now. It's such a different experience too with this album. I mean, it's for me, I don't know. It's interesting because I have obviously have such a deep obsession and love and fascination with movies, all things movies, and also soundtracks, film scores. To me, this movie feels or this album. I'm even calling it a movie. To me, Sketches of Spain feels like a soundtrack. It's so evocative. It's so there's so many great moods in this film. There's qualities of where I feel like it's romantical. It's very meditative. It's also kind of surreal. It has this dreamlike quality, and it's a really interesting combination of well different styles. I mean, Miles, just was such a legend and such a source of inspiration for me. I mean, when I think of my band Quantum, we overall like it's very safe to say, and it's pretty accurate to call us just an electronic band. At the end of the day, like we're an electronic. We make electronic music, but I think within that there's a lot of other things. Hopefully, to that, because my two favorite styles. I love all kinds of music, but my two favorite styles of music that I always go to is electronic music and then also jazz. That's probably mainly what I listen to, and I always go back to that. But with jazz music, I there was a period. It was interesting when I first started Quantum. Like a lot of the music was really inspired by, and it still is, but really inspired by electronic music like Altecker and a lot of house music that I grew up listening to, Deep Dish, Anthony Papa, who I saw this year, which was incredible. And then also inspired by some of the noise music that I'm really into, and it was also very inspired by a lot of the film scores that I love. Movies like Alien and Blade Runner, and then also growing up in and still loving that kind of music a lot, but listening to a lot of metal and death metal, black metal, all that stuff was a big inspiration for me, and also a lot of hip hop. Early on with the band, when I first started Quantum, that was, those were the, I guess more or less the key kind of inspirations for the weird music that we make or that I make. And even when I first started Quantum, which was recently, we kind of celebrated our 10-year anniversary. um you know I was listening to a lot of jazz. I had some experience playing in different jazz groups, playing in different bands that played a lot of like jazz standards and things like that. So jazz was like always a big love for me. And jazz as a whole, like I didn't get into jazz as far as just developing a taste of where I really love the music, like generally, and just got bit by the jazz bug. I didn't get that didn't happen to me until like pretty late, where I growing up I was when I was in high school, I studied with I've been really fortunate over the years um in my life, or if you want to call it career, to study with lots of amazing drum teachers. And so I've been really blessed with that and really fortunate, and a lot of different kinds of teachers. And, always usually just a great, so many great experiences around it and eye opening experiences. But I didn't get into jazz, like developing a taste for jazz music, until like almost after school. After I went to Berklee College of Music, and it wasn't until about after where it really got into my heart and soul, and I started to really fall in love, like generally fall in love with the music, to where it is now, you know. And so I had teachers, like in high school, I had a teacher and a few teachers that were, um, you know, and all through high school I played mostly rock and metal, and I never really got exposed to jazz music at all. It wasn't until later, and then I had a teacher, around the time I was in school, that would make me these, back when it was a thing, make me these like mixtapes of different jazz groups. Kind of Blue is one of the first albums he gave me. John Coltrane and Pat Metheny and John Schofield, various different jazz albums, and I had all of these cassettes that my one of my teachers had given me, with all these jazz players, and these were all recordings with, like, the first time I ever got a chance to hear, Elvin Jones and um, Tony Williams, Jack DeJohnette. I mean, just all of these legendary drummers. But I had it was weird because I had the hardest time getting into the music. I knew it was a weird thing because I remember, like, literally, like, kind of like it was yesterday. Well, like, I feel like I've always had a pretty good open mind to checking out new things, and being really open minded to, different kinds of films, obviously, and different kinds of music and different kinds of art, just in general. And I remember, like, having these cassettes, and I was taking lessons with a teacher that I had at the time, who was really versed in jazz and played a lot of jazz. Chris Palmer was his name, and so he would make these cassettes, and in my time, I would listen to these cassettes a lot, all the time, and it was so weird because I I really liked the music, and I really was trying to absorb as much of it as I could, because it was a whole. It was, for me. It was like essentially traveling. It's like traveling to a foreign country or a foreign land, and then having to learn about that culture and trying to learn the language so you can communicate. That's, to me, what it was like when I first got exposed to jazz. And but for the life of me, I could not get into the music. I would listen to, like, John Coltrane, albums that I was given, and cassette, and I could not get into them. I couldn't. The same thing with, like, Kind of Blue. Kind of Blue, probably, well, the greatest selling jazz album of all time, and I think probably one of the most accessible albums of all time for people. But I could not. Like, it was weird. Like, on one hand, I really liked it, but then I just felt like I couldn't really. I don't know. I couldn't really appreciate it enough. Couldn't really get into it. But at the same time, I knew that this is, like, incredible music, and this should be something I really get into. But for the life of me, I couldn't get into it. And one of the things that kept happening was I would sit there and listen to this music, and everything felt like old, like the all of the sounds of the instruments, the way the drums sounded, the way everything was recorded, it all sounded dated to me at the time. It all sounded old, and it all sounded like music from 1,000 years ago. And there was, for me at that time, there was nothing contemporary about it, so I couldn't get into it. And it was so different, and so foreign. But yet I knew this was important music, and I should really keep trying to get into it. It was like this weird thing. And I did that for like 2 or 3 years straight. And I was still listening to this music, all these cassettes. I remember almost wearing them out, trying to hopefully like develop this taste for this music of where I was like, okay, I can legitimately dig this. But it was so foreign to me. It was so different. Everything sounded old and dated, really weird. So I kept this up for about 2 years, and then after about 2 years of this, I did what I normally did. I put in a John Coltrane album or a John Scofield album, and suddenly it just like it was like literally like somebody turned on the light and the light went off, and I was like, wow, it's all making sense to me. This music is some of the most powerful music I've ever heard in my life, and it was really like this, um, like an epiphany or something. Like suddenly it all clicked. And ever since then, I like once that happened, I just went, down this big rabbit hole with like buying as many jazz albums as I could, and you know, searching out, whether I got into Wayne Shorter or Herbie Hancock, any of the jazz giants, I would do whatever I could to like get all of their albums. And that's what I did for quite a few years. And I developed this real big taste of where I started. I generally fell in love with this music to where now today it's one of my favorite styles of music to listen to. But it was a weird process and a long process getting to that place. And so over the years, I guess you could say I kind of had to hang up those kinds of hang ups with Sketches of Spain. And so about 2 years ago, I was at Goodwill in Rockland, and again, like I said, I've gotten so many great jazz CDs there and other kinds of styles of music. I saw this there, and it was like $2 or $3, super cheap, beautiful condition. It was still sealed, and it's also a remastered version that came out probably like 10 or 12 years ago. And this Sketches of Spain came out in 1960. And I remember I was like, okay, I should just actually buy this album and take my head out of my ass and actually listen to this album. And I remember putting it in, it's one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard. It's melancholy. It's very romantical, like I said. It has this very surrealistic, dreamlike quality to it. For me, it was easy to get into this album because for me, it feels like a film score. And this whole album was put together by, of course, Miles Davis and Gil Evans. And it's a really interesting album. There's so many different styles kind of incorporated into this record. You have the jazz element. You also have, the jazz or jazz fusion element. It's also very much inspired by, where it incorporates a lot of Spanish music, flamenco music, also world music, and there's also a little bit of kind of avant-garde, and also a classical flavor in this record. And it's amazing. It's such a there's a few tunes on this album, particularly like track 2 or 3, I should say 3 and 4, that I just think are some of the most haunting. Some of the melodies in this tune, and some of these tunes are just so haunting. And it was really interesting, like getting back to like when I first started Quantum, I had those general influences like I mentioned before. And you know when I first started writing music for that band, for my band Quantum, I used to write things more from the rhythmic um, way of doing things. Like I would come up with maybe a little bit of a drum groove either on my drum set, my acoustic drums, or on my drum machine, and I come up with like a some kind of groove or beat that I thought was kind of cool. And then from there I would go from that point to like adding some keyboards and other things and layer it from there. But usually for many years, for about 5 to 7 years, I always approached writing music for Quantum from like at first a rhythmic perspective. And and of course, all of those influences were a big key into what we were doing. And we played a lot of gigs. We were lucky, and I've been really fortunate to play a lot of gigs with this band because I know it's kind of a weird band, and the music we make is weird, and so. But I've been really super fortunate, and there's never a day where I take it for granted because I feel like it's such an amazing experience and feeling uh, that knowing that I can actually play gigs with this band and do all of the things that we've done, and such a wonderful outlet. And I love it more and more every year. And at that time, when the band started, we were playing, clubs and house parties and more kind of dance oriented kinds of venues. And after about 5 to 7 years, we started playing. We got this really cool residency at this place that is sadly long dead now, Fog Bar and Grill in Rockland, Maine, which was, out of all of the local venues here, that place was probably the most beloved place for me. So many great, wonderful memories, and it really was a key, that place was so key in our development as a band because we ended up getting a residency uh, at at Fog where we would play there um, usually twice a month, and we kept up this residency there for almost 2 or 3 years, and it was amazing because for me that was the best kind of series of gigs for this band because I felt like, well, it was really challenging, but we really had to develop. We really developed our sound. We really, got to stretch ourselves and and just develop. And I remember we would play for all of the gigs that we played there, and we kept up that schedule for about 2 or 3 years. And all of the shows that we would play there were usually about 3 hours. So on paper, that's a lot of time to be playing music, and especially even back then, we weren't doing covers. We weren't doing other people's music. I never had to do like a DJ thing of where I was like spinning other people's music. We always from the beginning always played original music. So that's one of the things. So the main thing of why I feel really, really fortunate. I don't know how. There's a lot of times where I'm like, I don't know how this works or how I'm doing this, but I really feel so incredibly fortunate that we've been able to keep that going. With that being a focus of where it's all original music. Whatever we're doing, it's all going to be original. But the biggest thing with that gig when we were at Fog was up until that point, we were playing more dance kind of venues and venues where we could be, play a little bit louder, if you will. But with the Fog gigs, we were starting like at 6:30 at night, and then we would go to like 9:30 or 10. There were 3 hour gigs. But the thing that was super challenging early on was we were starting our set when kind of the dinner crowd was there, kind of at the height of their dinner time and scene, and then by 8:30 or 9, the dinner crowd would be kind of that would be over, and then we would get the bar crowd. And at first it was super hard because the music that we were playing was just really not appropriate for the dinner crowd for obvious reasons. The stuff that was a little bit more higher energy and more dance oriented stuff, we could play that later when we had the bar crowd. But that music was totally not appropriate for people eating dinner. So it was really, really hard at first because we really had to I had to really figure out what kind of music could I write that is appropriate for this kind of setting. So I started writing a lot of music that was more ambient based music. It forced us to be more varied in styles. Like I started having to write music that was more mellow essentially, and also more ambient based, quieter music. And at that point, I started to like really I tried to bring in influences of music into Quantum that were non electronic, for instance. And I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. Mike Whitehead, my great friend Mike, who plays bass in Quantum, his background is he's an amazing, amazing jazz musician, and that's his main thing. And I remember him saying to me, when it comes to writing, he always felt when it comes to writing music, melody is key. Like if you have a really good melody, then everything else can fall into place. But if you don't have a really good melody, it's not really, you're not going to really stick your landing. And ever since we had that conversation, I totally changed my whole way of how I operated and how I approached writing music. So I switched gears completely and started focusing on sheer melody as the starting point. And that whole kind of mindset or way of creativity is based out of the jazz world. It's all, so I started to try to, all of the jazz I was listening to, I started to really, try to use that as an influence as far as melody. And then there was a time too where I listened to so much jazz, and over time, and especially around the Fog gig, I started writing tunes where I felt like, okay, this is like really coming from the jazz world. And so, whether people hear it or not, that's okay. But for me, jazz music, all of this stuff, fusion, is a big influence on the music that I write in Quantum. Outside of the obvious other influences, and especially when it comes to melody and all of those things. So we really learned a lot, and suddenly our sets became. I like to think that suddenly our sets and our style of music became more diverse. And after a while of doing this gig, we were able to adjust and play music that was really appropriate. Music that had a little bit more of a jazzy or vibe, more ambient based stuff, and stuff that was even more melodic. And then towards the end of the night, when the dinner crowd was coming in, we could play the heavier stuff. So that was one of the best experiences I ever had. Well, it was the best experience I've ever had with the music for Quantum and just developing the sound. And it was interesting too because, and I've had this experience with other bands where, certain bands that I've been in, and even bands that I listen to, but more so with bands that I've played with, you know, sometimes when you're on your own and you're playing in a rock band or a cover band or funk band, what have you, you might be writing music on your own and you're like excited by the songs and you want to bring it to the band and see what they think and maybe you can do it. But there's been times in the past where that song or thing that your concept that you have is not really going to fit in that band. It's not going to be, it's not going to be the right fit. It's just not going to work in that particular genre of what that music is for that band. And I've always felt, for me personally, that's always like that's an obvious thing. But to me, I find it kind of frustrating. And I had run into that kind of situation a lot, So, but over time, I felt like Quantum evolved into this thing of where I suddenly, whatever I was writing stylistically, whether it was more on the rock side or more on the funkier side or more, experimental side, I suddenly felt like I created this band, this weird little band that I have that uh, I could bring those weird ideas to this band. Like it was so open that it didn't matter, and any of that stuff could be appropriate. And that was an amazing experience coming into that. So getting back to Sketches of Spain, this is another album for me. Even though I was after getting into this album and just getting so obsessed with Sketches of Spain, I really kicked myself in the ass for being like, why the hell didn't I listen to this album years ago? But ever since I discovered this album and listened to it, I've like listened to this album like a bazillion times. It's such a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite Miles Davis albums, and I like to think something that's so beautiful like this album, and there's so many emotional um, such an emotional quality to it and so many different moods. I'd love to think that maybe some of this music could trickle into what we do as Quantum. You know, it will never be as good as something like this, but I would be happy if that can happen and maybe people could hear that. But what an inspiration and one of the most gorgeous and one of the most incredible albums ever made. It's easily one of my favorite Miles Davis albums. I love this album and super late to the game with checking it out. I never heard the original version, so I can't really compare. But from what I've heard, I do have other Miles albums of where they remastered them, and this is part of that same series. And I so I in other albums I've been able to kind of compare and contrast, and I definitely prefer the remastered versions. So, but this album is just it feels like it came out today, like it's so modern, and I just love how it just blends so many different styles. And the main thing for me is it feels like a film score. So, yeah. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.